For 31 years, my family called me the practical one. My older sister was the beautiful one. My younger brother was the gifted one. I was the one who could be relied on to show up, fold the chairs, and disappear into the background. At my brother's engagement party, my mother introduced me to his fiancé's father by saying, "And this is Holly, our backup plan in case anything ever happens to the other two." She laughed like it was the best joke she'd ever told. I looked at my mother, then I looked at the man she'd just said it to, a tall stranger in a charcoal suit who wasn't laughing at all. He reached into his jacket and handed her a card. "Actually," he said, "I'm here because of her. Before I tell you what was printed on that card, and what it did to my family by the end of the night, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever been the one nobody bothered to see, hit subscribe because this one's for you." My name is Holly. I'm 31 years old, and I grew up in a 4-bedroom colonial in Westchester County, New York. The kind of house with a circular driveway and a brass mailbox that my father polished every spring like it was a trophy. My parents, Carol and Dennis Whitfield, were the kind of people who measured a good life by how it photographed. My father ran a regional insurance brokerage that did fine, not spectacular, but fine enough to fund the lifestyle my mother insisted on. The country club membership, the leased Mercedes, the Cape Cod summer rental every August. Appearances were the family religion, and in our house every child had an assigned role in the liturgy. My older sister Brooke was the beautiful one. She'd been told this since she was old enough to understand the word, and by the time she was 16 she'd built an entire identity around it: pageant photos on the mantle, a closet color-coded by season, a boyfriend roster that read like a yearbook superlatives list. My younger brother Tyler, no wait, I need a different name. My younger brother Spencer was the gifted one. Spencer skipped 2nd grade. Spencer played varsity tennis. Spencer got into Cornell early decision, and my parents framed the acceptance letter like it was a piece of art. And me. I was the practical one. That was the nicest way my mother ever put it. The less nice ways came out at family dinners, usually after her second glass of Chardonnay. Holly's our little worker bee. Holly doesn't need attention the way Brooke does. We don't worry about Holly, she just handles things. I used to think those were compliments. It took me until I was almost 25 to understand they were a different kind of insult, the kind that sounds like praise but means, "We don't see you as a person who needs anything." I was the one who remembered to bring napkins to the 4th of July barbecue. I was the one who drove 2 hours to pick Brooke up when her car broke down on the Titanic, then drove 2 hours back without so much as a thank you text. I was the one who sat with Spencer for 3 nights straight when he had pneumonia in 8th grade, missing my own midterms, while my parents were at a charity gala because it had already been paid for. Nobody ever asked if I minded. It was simply assumed that I would, because that was my function. Every family is a small economy, and in ours, I was the unpaid labor that kept the whole operation running while everyone else got to be the product. I went to a state school on scholarships and loans because my parents had already drained the college fund on Brooke's out-of-state tuition and Spencer's private tutors. I studied finance, not because I had some grand passion for it, but because it was the one thing I was good at that nobody in my family could take credit for or take away from me. Numbers didn't care whose daughter I was. A balance sheet didn't ask if I was pretty or gifted. It just asked if I was right, and I was almost always right. After graduation, I moved to Boston and took an entry-level analyst job at a mid-size private equity firm, the kind of unglamorous work that involves spreadsheets at 11 at night and lukewarm coffee at 6 in the morning. I didn't tell my family much about it because they didn't ask much about it. Every phone call home was about Brooke's wedding planning, or Spencer's law school applications, or my mother's latest kitchen renovation. When I did mention a promotion, my mother's response was, "That's nice, honey. Very practical of you," and then she'd pivot straight back to whether the wedding florist should do peonies or ranunculus. What my family did not know, because I never told them, because somewhere around year 3, I stopped wanting to hand them anything else to ignore, was that I was good at my job in a way that got noticed. I was good at finding companies other people overlooked, the unglamorous, unsexy, undervalued ones, and figuring out what they were actually worth underneath the mess. 2 years ago, with a small group of former colleagues, I co-founded my own investment fund. We were lean, and we were quiet, and we were, within 18 months, extremely profitable. By the time I was 30, My name was on documents that controlled stakes in 11 companies across 4 states, including, though my family had absolutely no idea, a controlling interest in the regional insurance holding company that had quietly acquired my father's brokerage 3 years earlier in a merger he'd been thrilled about at the time. I want to be honest about something. I didn't plan any of this as revenge. I want to say that clearly, because I know how it's going to sound by the end. I built my career because I was good at it, and because, somewhere along the way, it became the only place I felt like a whole person instead of a function. The reckoning that came later wasn't a plot. It was just math finally landing where it was always going to land. Spencer's engagement party was held at the Ridgefield Country Club in October, the kind of event my mother had clearly been dreaming about since the day Spencer was born. He was marrying a woman named Quinn, whose family owned 3 regional car dealerships and apparently several opinions about who was worth talking to. The club's ballroom had been done up in cream and gold, string lights threaded through white birch branches, a 4-piece string quartet, playing something that was probably Vivaldi, but might as well have been elevator music for how little anyone was listening to it. I almost didn't go. I'd had a board meeting that morning in Hartford that ran long, and I drove straight to Ridgefield still in my charcoal suit, the one that cost more than my father's car payment, because I hadn't had time to change. I want to tell you, I noticed how it looked walking in, but the truth is I'd stopped noticing things like that a long time ago. To my family, clothes on me were just clothes. They decided who I was when I was 9 years old, and no tailoring in the world had ever updated the file. I found a spot near one of the tall windows, away from the dance floor, with a club soda in my hand, and I watched the party the way I usually watched my family's parties, like an anthropologist observing a culture I happened to be distantly related to. My father was holding court near the bar, telling some story about the merger that saved the brokerage, gesturing with a scotch in his hand to a circle of men who nodded like he was dispensing wisdom from a mountaintop. My mother was orbiting the room, touching elbows, complimenting dresses, making sure every single person in that ballroom understood that the Whitfields had arrived, socially and financially, once and for all. Brooke found me first. She was 34 now, married to a guy named Wesley who sold commercial real estate and talked about it constantly, and she still had that particular way of looking at me like she was trying to remember why I'd been invited. "Oh, Holly, you came," she said, the same way you'd say it about weather. "I didn't think you'd get out of the city in time." "Board meeting ran long," I said. "Of course it did." She said it like a punchline, glancing at my suit, then past me, already scanning the room for someone more interesting. "Did you bring a date?" "No, right." She said it like that explained something. Then her eyes caught on someone across the room and she was gone, drifting toward a cluster of her old sorority friends, leaving me with my club soda and the quartet's interpretation of Vivaldi. That was when my mother appeared, towing a man behind her I didn't recognize. He was tall, gray at the temples, somewhere in his 50s, dressed in a charcoal suit sharper than mine, with the kind of unhurried posture you only see in people who have never once needed to prove anything to a room. My mother had her hand on his forearm in the particular way she used when she wanted someone to know they were being given a privilege. "Holly, darling, this is Mr. Caldwell. He's an old business associate of your father's, very important in the regional banking world." She turned to him with a bright, practiced smile. "And this is Holly, our youngest, well, our practical one. She's quite the disappointment, compared to her siblings, but every family needs one of those, don't they?" She laughed, that bright country club laugh she used when she wanted a comment to land as a joke, instead of what it actually was. I want to tell you I had some witty comeback ready. I didn't. I'd heard versions of that sentence my entire life, and the muscles you'd use to react had simply atrophied. I just looked at her, and then I looked at Mr. Caldwell, expecting the polite, uncomfortable smile strangers usually gave when they realized they'd witnessed something they shouldn't have. He wasn't smiling at all. "Actually," he said, his voice even and unhurried, "I'm here because of her." My mother's bright laugh stuttered into something confused. "I'm sorry?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, the heavy cream kind with embossed lettering, and held it out, not to my mother but to me, like he was confirming something he already knew. "Holly Whitfield, Meridian Capital Partners. I recognized you from the Hartford filing photos. We've been trying to set up a meeting with your office for 3 weeks." The ballroom didn't go silent, not dramatically. The quartet kept playing, glasses kept clinking, but the small circle around us went very, very quiet. My mother's hand was still on his forearm, frozen there. "I'm sorry," she said again, a different sentence this time smaller. "I think there's some confusion. Holly works in finance, some kind of analyst position. Holly is the managing partner of Meridian Capital," Mr. Caldwell said, looking at her now, not unkindly, just factually, the way you'd correct someone's math. "Her fund holds the controlling interest in Granite State Holdings." He paused. "Which, as I understand it, acquired Whitfield Insurance Brokerage in a merger about 3 years ago." I watched my mother's face do something I'd genuinely never seen it do before. It went through several emotions in about 4 seconds: confusion, disbelief, a flicker of something that might have been pride before it curdled, fast, into pure panic, because she was doing the math too. And the math meant that the daughter she'd just called a disappointment and a backup plan, in front of a room full of people whose opinions she cared about more than oxygen, controlled the company her husband worked for. That can't be right," she said. But her voice had lost its country club polish entirely. "It's right," I said. It was the first thing I'd said since Mr. Caldwell arrived, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. I should have mentioned it sooner, it just never seemed to come up. That last part wasn't entirely true. It had come up. I'd tried twice, over the past 2 years, to tell my parents what I'd built. Once at Christmas, when I'd started a sentence with "Actually, my fund just closed a deal," and my mother had cut me off mid-word to ask Brooke about her dress fitting. Once at my own birthday dinner, when I'd mentioned Meridian by name, and my father had nodded vaguely and asked if that was still the spreadsheet thing. After that, I stopped trying, not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. There's only so many times you can offer someone a piece of yourself and watch them set it down without looking at it before you stop offering. My father had made his way over by then, drawn by the stillness, the way people are always drawn to stillness in a loud room. "Caldwell," he said, recognizing him finally, sticking out his hand with the booming confidence of a man who'd built his whole identity on never being the one out of the loop. "Didn't know you'd be here tonight." "Richard," Mr. Caldwell said, shaking his hand. "I was actually hoping to run into your daughter. We've got some matters to discuss regarding Granite State's Q3 restructuring." He glanced at me. "Holly, do you have a few minutes? I know it's a family event, I apologize for the timing." My father's smile was still on his face, but it had gone rigid, like a mask that no longer fit the bones underneath. "Restructuring," he repeated. "I'm sorry, what restructuring?" I could have softened it. I'd had years of practice softening things, smoothing them down so they wouldn't disturb anyone's evening. But something in me, something that had been quiet and patient for 31 years, decided it didn't want to soften this one. "Granite State is considering consolidating several regional offices," I said, "including the Westchester branch." My father's face went the color of the tablecloths. Holly, that's my branch. I run that branch." "I'm aware," I said. "It's actually one of the reasons I asked for the meeting to be scheduled discreetly. I didn't think it was something to discuss at Spencer's party." "You're on the board," he said slowly, like he was assembling a puzzle he didn't want finished. "You're... what? You're telling me you have a say in whether I keep my job?" "I have more than a say," I said, quietly. "I have the controlling vote." By then a small audience had gathered without quite seeming to, the way crowds do at parties, drifting closer under the pretense of refilling drinks. Brooke had drifted back from her sorority cluster, her face doing the same confused to panicked transformation our mothers had done a minute earlier. Spencer, the groom-to-be, had wandered over from the dance floor with Quinn on his arm, and I watched Quinn's father, a stocky man in an even nicer suit than Mr. Caldwell's, lean in towards someone and ask a quiet question, his eyebrows climbing as he got an answer. "Why," my mother said, finally finding her voice again, "would you let your father find out like this, at his own son's engagement party?" I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about all the dinners, the recitals, the graduations, the small daily erosions of being told, gently, constantly, that I was the one who didn't need things, didn't need attention, didn't need to be asked how I was doing because I could simply handle it. I thought about driving 2 hours for Brooke and getting nothing. I thought about missing my midterms for Spencer and getting nothing. I thought about 31 years of being introduced as the practical one, the backup plan, the disappointment, with a laugh attached so it would sound like love. I didn't let him find out like this, I said. You did. About 90 seconds ago, when you introduced me to a business associate as a disappointment and a backup plan, in front of him, before I'd said a single word. I let that sit for a second. I've been trying to tell this family what I do for 2 years. Nobody had time to listen. I stopped trying to make time for something nobody wanted to hear. My mother opened her mouth, and for once in her life, nothing came out. Mr. Caldwell, to his credit, looked like a man who deeply regretted his timing but had no graceful way to undo it now. Perhaps we should reconvene this conversation on Monday, he said carefully. I apologize again for the intrusion. That's not necessary, I said. I think the conversation's actually overdue. I won't pretend the rest of the party continued normally, because it didn't. Word moves through a country club ballroom faster than any text chain, and by the time the cake was cut, I watched at least a dozen people recalibrate, in real time, the way they looked at me. The same aunts who'd spent years asking Brooke about her wedding registry and Spencer about law school suddenly remembered I existed and wanted to know about Meridian's portfolio. I answered politely and briefly, and I left before the toasts. The fallout started the next morning and didn't really stop for weeks. My father called first, at 7 a.m., his voice doing that thing where anger tries to disguise itself as hurt. You humiliated me in front of my colleagues, he said. No greeting, nothing. Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation? I told the truth about my job, I said. You humiliated yourself a long time before last night. I just stopped covering for it. He didn't have anything to say to that, he hung up. My mother's approach was different, softer, which was somehow worse. She called that afternoon, her voice doing its best wounded bird impression. I just don't understand why you'd want to hurt this us, she said. We've always been so proud of you. You've never once said that to me, I said. Not in 31 years. You said it last night, after you found out what I was worth, in front of people you wanted to impress. That's not pride, Mom. That's math. She didn't have an answer for that either. The silence on the line went on long enough that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Here is what I want to be honest about, because I think it matters more than the satisfying part of this story. I didn't go after my family. I didn't engineer the merger that put Granite State in control of Whitfield Insurance. That deal had closed 3 years earlier, long before that party, made on its financial merits by people who'd never heard of my father beyond his name on a quarterly report. I didn't orchestrate Mr. Caldwell showing up at the party. That was simple bad timing. A man trying to track down a managing partner he'd been chasing for weeks. I didn't choose to let the branch consolidation conversation happen there. I tried, in fact, to redirect it. The truth is, my family built their own reckoning, slowly, over years, by refusing to see who I actually was, by assuming that the person who never demanded attention must not deserve any, by mistaking my quietness for emptiness instead of what it actually was, which was just me, surviving in the only way that was available to me. In the weeks that followed, the Westchester branch consolidation went through. My father wasn't fired exactly. That would have made for a cleaner story, but he was offered a senior advisory role at half his previous salary. With none of the authority the kind of offer companies make when they want someone to leave on their own terms. He took early retirement instead, with a severance package the board approved without my objection. Because I'm not actually a monster, whatever my mother told her book club friends that winter. Brooke stopped speaking to me for about 4 months, then resumed speaking to me once she and Wesley needed a co-signer for an investment property and remembered suddenly that I existed and had money. I said no, not out of spite, but because I'd finally learned the difference between being needed and being used, and I wasn't interested in confusing the two ever again. Spencer, to his credit, was the only one who called and actually apologized, not for the engagement party exactly, but for something larger, for years of letting me fold the chairs while he got the framed acceptance letters. We talk now occasionally, real conversations, not the kind performed for an audience. My mother and I have what I'd call a cautious truce. She introduces me differently now when she introduces me at all. Last month, at a smaller family dinner, I heard her tell a neighbor, "This is my daughter Holly, she runs an investment fund." No jokes, no qualifiers, no practical one attached like a leash. It wasn't an apology. I don't think one is coming, not really, not in the form I might have wanted at 22. But it was something. I've learned to let something count for more than it used to. I think about that night at the club sometimes, the string quartet, the cream and gold, The way my mother's hand froze on Mr. Caldwell's forearm when the math finally landed. People love to imagine these moments as triumphant, the underdog finally getting her due, the room gasping, the credits rolling. It wasn't quite that clean. There was no triumph in watching my father's face go the color of a tablecloth. There was just a strange, quiet relief. The relief of finally being seen accurately, even if it took 31 years and a stranger's business card to do it. I didn't build Meridian to prove anything to my family. I want that understood. I built it because somewhere in my 20s, I got tired of being defined by what other people decided I lacked, and I found something I was good at that nobody could shrink down to a nickname. The reckoning with my family wasn't the point. It was just what happens when you finally stop hiding the truth so other people can stay comfortable in their version of you. These days, when people ask about my family, I tell them the truth. It's complicated, we're working on it, some days are better than others. I don't need it to be a fairy tale. I just needed it, eventually, to be honest. And for the first time in my life, when someone asks who Holly Whitfield is, the answer doesn't depend on which sibling I'm standing next to.